You're listening to Project Management Paradise, the ultimate project management podcast.
Hello again and welcome to Project Management Paradise. Johnny Byrne here, and this podcast delivers real project management insights from experts around the world. Today I speak with Martin Egan about how to manage and deal with project commitment issues. Martin has over 20 years experience in organisational leadership and performance and is a director at New Direction Consulting. Hello Martin and welcome to the podcast.
Hi there Johnny, welcome too, thank you.
Nice to catch up with you again.
It's good, after having several years together working closely as students and now in the real world together again.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I won't say how many years on, but anyway, moving swiftly along.
Yes.
Just for our listeners, can you tell us what you actually do for organisations?
Sure. So I work with companies, usually with the top 100 in a small to medium-sized company, to get really clear on their ways of working and to ensure that the patterns of behaviour and the culture that they have, not just the values that are on the displays outside or on the website, but the way they actually are lived every day, that they are in service of what it is they're trying to do as an organisation.
And you typically work then with quite senior, if not the most senior people in the organisation?
With the most senior where possible. Occasionally, if it has to be a Trojan horse approach, maybe with some people who have some influence and they're not the most senior, but we usually end up needing to bring the most senior with us at some point along the way.
Great. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about project commitment issues.
Yeah, they're very common in every sphere, from individual projects with as little as 2 people working on them to big projects that affect nearly everybody in the organisation.
And what are the main areas around commitment with others that affect the success of a project?
I think I'll start with a trap. I think the biggest trap that thwarts projects desperately is assumptions. And the assumptions that I'm making are not the same as the assumptions you're making, and yet we're together doing the same podcast. Now, thankfully, in this example, we checked our assumptions at the beginning and agreed that they were aligned enough for us to do this podcast. But that's a lovely example of just a simple thing like us having a chat for a while, that it has shared assumptions that match. That same checking of assumptions and that they match does not occur thoroughly enough in many business projects.
And what do you do then, or what advice do you give to stop that from happening, I guess, or get those assumptions in line?
So mostly what we do is we train people, or else we facilitate and help them live with their real situation to ensure that they're having the right conversation, and that right conversation is covering all the bases that need to be covered. And typically a well-experienced project manager will cover all the bases on outcome and task pretty well. So they'll have a Gantt chart or a flow diagram or some kind of project management system that will be touching on all of the milestones that they believe they have to reach. But it's less common to see that they have the same detail for how they're going to communicate, when they're going to communicate, what the content of their communication is going to be, how they're going to address or escalate when it's not running smoothly. So the whole relational human understanding element doesn't receive the same kind of attention as the task and outcome piece does. So we help to make a balance between those two. That's our main work.
So have you examples in terms, to me it sounds like going to the nth degree when, there should be a certain amount of flow and conversations and a little bit of, how will I say it, let the experience that the team have, that rely on that experience? Or is it going to the nth degree, or can you give me some examples just for our listeners on what else exists? When you mentioned Gantt charts and flow charts and milestones and all that great stuff, what physically exists over and above that for the work that you do, or what do you put in place?
Yeah, the main thing we'd put in place would be an agreement around how we're going to work together. And that would be co-created by both sides. So let's take an example of a project in a company where IT and finance are both involved as the main stakeholders in a large project. And IT are going to be doing all of the programming and design and making sure that it works. But finance are putting in all of the content and all of the specification and criteria that meets their satisfaction, because it's a project that's going to streamline, say, payments from customers with customer accounts or any generic thing like that. So IT are very competent to do the bit that they're doing, and finance are very competent to do the content piece that they're doing. But somehow or other, the potential for everything to break down, or at least not flow smoothly, between members of the teams from both of those functions is just huge. So it sounds a little bit common sense to say that despite all the planning in the world and all the best project management in the world, something can still break down just because the IT group are in their world and their assumptions, and the finance group are in their world and their assumptions, and something doesn't get teased out thoroughly enough between the two of them, despite all of the planning in the world. And that generally, Johnny, becomes a relationship personality thing. It may be something as simple as a small little irritation that exists between the two most senior stakeholders on both sides. And it could all be simply solved with just a different kind of conversation happening among those two. Get the elephants in the room out, get the undiscussables on the table, and agree a way forward, and bingo, you've got a project that's working like 10 times better.
And all of this then contributes to the reduction of risk of misunderstanding.
Well, yes, but most of all, risk of not delivering on time, which in one sense is, I think, one of the least of the risks, because they're usually man-made or artificial boundaries that are on kind of bonuses or payments or different things. I think a bigger risk is that the project won't deliver what it was meant to deliver, even if it ticks all the boxes to say that it did. And you could nearly call it projectitis. That I think I've seen huge companies, big blue chip companies, and they are brilliant at project management. And the project management becomes bigger and more important than what the whole company is meant to be doing.
So the project is bigger than the company itself, you're saying, or?
Yes, people can be very busy, almost like we would say busy fools, very busy managing their project, looking after their project, minding their project, and in fact delivering very successfully on their project. But it's still removed from what was the overall function and purpose. We see it in huge government projects in the UK or maybe in any country, like the project that was going to do border security there about 3 years ago in the UK, and it was billions and billions of pounds, and then it was just pulled the plug on it completely because it wasn't going to do what it was going to do. And it's often too late when they discover that, oh, that didn't really do what we wanted it to do, let's do another one.
And when you go into an organisation then and you're working with senior people and you're advising that a couple of these items that they may or may not have that you're saying are going to help the success of the project, for people who say we have all this already, we have the good conversations, the protocols, the processes in place already, and you're probably from experience thinking maybe they think they do. How do you make sure they do, or overcome that we know everything type statement, or we have everything in place, we don't need this advice?
That's a lovely question, and this is where I have to bring out every skill and experience I have, especially humility. The first one is to think that that's possibly true, and if it is, I'm really delighted to hear it and want to understand all of the signs of that being the case, because that's a fantastic success story. So that's the humility part. The cynic then comes in equal measure and says, I don't believe you. I might not say that out loud. The truth is, if we boil it down to what it is that the project is meant to be able to do for the company or for the people involved or the end user or whatever stakeholders there are, if all of those people can look each other in the eye and say, I'm thrilled to bits with it, it's great, well done, we can be proud of ourselves, then I believe that. But if all of them cannot say that, and some maybe have more pressing concerns than others, then we know that there's room for improvement.
So I'm still curious though, so how does the conversation go? You know, or they say they've it all in place, you find out they don't. How do you convince them that they need to do a little bit more?
Well, if we get the right people in the room who are affected by it, or let's say it's a project down the company somewhere, maybe in one of the business units of a company, and I have had a meeting the previous day with the senior executive of the company, the top leadership team, and there I'm hearing issues or concerns around collaboration or around accountability sometimes even. And where's the breakdown between what I'm hearing in that meeting and the kind of everything is fine in my world that I'm hearing in another meeting. So, I mean, it's awfully tricky, and I find this tricky personally, to not become antagonistic in those scenarios, because I'm not helping things if I do. But I might have a private moment for a second where I'm thinking, well, you guys are all telling me that you're fantastic at collaboration, and yet all of my other experience in the company, or maybe even some research we might have done in the company around diagnosing or assessing patterns of behaviour at work, would not have found lovely examples of collaboration, but would have kind of seen my patch, minding my patch and my piece. So it's always different every time. But usually if there's enough of trust in us as trusted advisors of the company, space emerges where a different conversation can happen. And it has to be non-threatening. I mean, if I'm coming in like the school inspector and letting them all feel judged and under pressure to meet a standard, then I might as well not have come in at all. I've got to come in and be their partner, no matter who the stakeholder is.
And when projects then have, related to that, they have more than one conversation going on. How do you deal with that and fix that for people, or get the one conversation going as opposed to a few different ones?
Yes. Now that you asked a question earlier about are we working with the top? If they set the objective of what are the key priorities and key focus areas for the business for the next, 6 months, 12 months, whatever length of time, then that should establish in terms of rules of engagement or priority hierarchy of what we're focusing on, and that ought to eliminate things that are not urgent or shouldn't be getting the energy right now. Like in one company I was in recently, we were able to cancel or pause at least 3 or 4 big projects across the whole company in the interest of making another one that was more critical successful. And if that was a tough decision to take. It's almost like that's another project management question. When should you stop a project and why? And I think that's the key question that gets avoided in many companies, because our pet projects are our pet projects and we will not give them up no matter what. And maybe the person who started that project, or all of the people involved with it ever since, out of pride or out of devotion or dedication or any other good reasons, doesn't want it to stop now. And in fact, it might even be someone new who comes in and says, hey, what's going on here? Pause this one for now. This is really going down on a wild goose chase or down another rabbit hole, or whatever way they might view it.
And do you have a formal method to assess, or how did you come to the conclusion and get agreement that this one will be the one that's going to continue and these few are going to pause?
Yeah, that took a couple of days. In fact, it took a couple of days over several weeks to look at what are the competing needs that are around. Something changes in the market. Some other requirement changes. You get a new customer coming in and they're absorbing more than a third of your staff on something, and you still have original targets that you've got to meet and everything. So something has to give somewhere, and having an enlightened conversation together with all the key stakeholders to reach a conclusion to say, as hard and all as it is, this is what we need to do in order to make one thing successful. Like many mini successes versus one significant success. So it's not an easy conversation, but it emerges if people have the right conversation. And that's where facilitation often helps. It's so much easier if you have someone as a neutral observer in the room to allow all the cards to land on the table. And I often find this with teams that I've worked with for years even. They're still reluctant to put all their cards on the table when I'm not there. It's almost like they know that someone, let's say Johnny in the corner, who's going to attack or bite back, won't do so in the same way if I'm there, because we sort of have a different decorum. There's a visitor here. So I never worded it like that before, but I think people say, consultants coming in, they're a waste of money. Sometimes perhaps they are. But if there was one simple side effect of them coming in, that's the one that I see the most.
And I suppose it's another form of commitment issue too, where people are committed to a project so much that they won't give it up, even though from your work you might see, as you did with that organisation, that these are a couple of projects that have to be paused, and then the commitment issue is not lack of commitment, it's too committed to a project and won't give it up.
Exactly. And I saw a nice side of that once. There was a pharmaceutical company, a global pharma company I was in, and pharma, by the way, was my own background. I was a scientist originally in working life. And plug was pulled on several research projects, for drug discovery. But a couple of good old foolhardy chemists who weren't going to be convinced by any corporate stuff managed to keep these little projects going on their own on the side. And lo and behold, one of them did turn into a drug. So, that's too complicated to even get into here. It's more like a ethical, moral, personal conviction, philosophical conversation. They didn't agree with what was stopped, and they found a way in their spare time to keep something ticking over, and maybe that all fitted into the system too some way.
Great. So as we come to the end of the interview, just a couple of key points that come to mind, one or two, in terms of managing and, kind of a summary answer, if you will, just managing commitment issues. What would be the one or two little nuggets you would leave people with?
Well, I think, Johnny, I'll leave you with a three-legged stool. And the three legs on the stool are the task, the relationship, and the individual. And those three are always going to be around in every single project. So if I finish with the last leg again, the individual has kind of convictions like those chemists that went and kept the project going. They've got strong reactions and values that they have to be able to live with doing their job and doing whatever they do. There needs to be a place for them to be at peace with them, one way or other in doing their job. And they've got to pay attention to those, because sometimes an objection in an individual may actually be a very valid and wise objection to be voiced. So that all rests on that individual leg. The relationship leg then is all we've been talking about, getting clear agreement and understanding about the assumptions that each person is making and narrowing it down to something that's agreed. And then the task is usually, I didn't talk about it as much because I think it's well attended to in terms of the success criteria and the specifications and the requirements and the outcome. There's always room for improvement, but that leg is usually pretty well developed. And then the stool is a bit wonky with the other two legs not balanced in the same way. Great.
Well, look, thank you very much. If people want to find out more about you, your colleagues, your business, where should they go?
Our website is newdirectionconsulting.co.uk, and we do a lot of work in Ireland as well as in the British mainland, whatever I'm supposed to call it these days. It's changing its name, I suspect, as we talk. And anywhere else, indeed, around the world. We have colleagues and teams and associates that work everywhere. But that's our website link.
Great. Well, I'll include that in the show notes. And on behalf of us all here at the Project Management Paradise podcast, just to thank you very much for giving up some of your time to be with us on the podcast today and taking the time to go through the questions.
It was a pleasure, Johnny. Thank you too.
So that was Martin Egan from New Direction Consulting. I trust you picked up some valuable tips from that interview. You will find a link to Martin's website in the show notes at projectmanagementparadise.com/4. We'd also love to hear an honest review and welcome feedback about this podcast at the same link. That's projectmanagementparadise.com/4. Thanks again for listening, and tune in again next week for another great interview.
Thanks for listening to the Project Management Paradise podcast at projectmanagementparadise.com.